Welcome to the SUPfm Podcast, and this is our 10th year of the show, and our mission remains exactly the same as it was on day one: to help us improve our knowledge, increase our love of both sport and the water, and to inspire you on and off your boards. Today's episode is a little different. It's a moment to pause, to reflect, and to celebrate a decade of conversations, adventures, racing debates, safety lessons, laughter, and yes, the occasional recording wobble along the way. And I couldn't have thought of a better person to share this milestone with than today's guest, Sarah SUP Junkie Thornley, racer, commentator, community builder, SUP Connect Woman of the Year, national champion, and one of the most passionate voices in UK paddleboarding. As regular listeners know, Sarah has been part of this journey in so many ways, as a guest and as a collaborator on Racing Courage, and also as someone who lives and breathes this sport. In this episode, we look back at some of the themes that have shaped the podcast over the last 10 years. Adventure, racing, resilience, community, and the people who've pushed boundaries both on and off the water. There are callbacks to past guests, reflections on how the sport has evolved, and a few honest conversations about where things might head next. So let's hand the mic across and get into it. And the second thing is to hand across hosting to my frequent collaboration partner on the show, Sarah Thornley, spelt correctly.
I noticed.
And I really appreciate you taking over the hosting duties.
Absolute pleasure. I never thought I'd have the honour to be in this elevated position, Simon. Thank you so much.
Well, 10 years is a long time.
10 years is a long time. 10 years is a hugely long time. First of all, I know I've done this before, but many, many congratulations on your 10 years. It's no mean feat. Podcasts come and podcasts go, but here we still are 10 years later. Congratulations on that. One of the questions I'd love to ask you, actually, which we haven't discussed, is how did you get into SUP? Because SUP led you to the SUPfm podcast journey. So let's hear your story of how you got into SUP.
Well, it was a bit of a life journey for us. I'd spent quite a lot of time in the corporate environment and work, and sporting-wise, it was all about rugby and endurance sports, mostly rugby, actually, if I'm honest. But we had a long-standing dream to move down to the coast, and we worked on it for a number of years, and finally we did. So, you know, the coast was calling us for quite some years. And as part of that, I thought, well, it would be a bit of a waste if I was down on the coast and not spending time in the water. So lots of discussion, debate about what I would do on the water. And SUP was just coming to my attention at the time. So that ultimately became the thing. But the real thing that really made it stick with me was I had some friends down from London. We hired a couple of boards and a couple of sit-on-top kayaks fairly near to where I live now in Mudderford, and we went out. And it wasn't the most promising day. It was horizontal rain and a really serious headwind. But I spent all of my time on the SUP. I fell in, I guess, about 30 times, but realising there was some degree of sort of learning curve to it, plus the ability to be able to see from on top of the water. And it was such a basic sport with just a board and a paddle. It instantly got its hooks into me. So that was my first experience. Yeah, horizontal wind, a force, I don't know, force 4, 5 or whatever in my face, but absolutely loved it.
So many people would have given up at that very moment, Simon. So well done again to you for sticking with it. Gosh, so you'd been paddleboarding, you knew you loved it. Where on earth did the idea of creating a podcast? Were you like a regular listener, or did it just come to you as we need to do a SUP podcast?
Well, it was an accidental journey. So I had been interested in podcasting for probably 10 years before I launched this one, and the podcast originally was a collaboration with a chap called Nick Robinson, South African guy living in Portugal. And we had originally connected because I'd done some clothing sponsorship for an event that he was doing in Portugal. So my first sort of dipping my toe into the world of SUP was a brand called Hutch Supwear. There are still some odd items available on eBay if you're interested in searching that. So as part of that, I produced all of the event T-shirts for this Guadiana Challenge, which was an event that he ran down the Guadiana River in Portugal. So we were looking at other opportunities to work together. You know, I suggested the podcast. He might have suggested the podcast. I can't remember. Anyway, we came together on it, and that's where we launched it. And, without his confidence and go-get-'em type attitude, but it was a great collaboration to get things moving.
Yeah, brilliant. And did you ever believe that 10 years later it would still be going?
I didn't. I mean, I had hopes, and we have been on a bit of a journey on the way. So Nick stepped back from the podcast about 5 years ago now, and it is a considerable amount of work. And I think people don't necessarily realise that because they see the podcast and one that flows fairly well. There's a huge amount of work that goes in. And generally that's referred to in the podcast business as pod fade, where people start off a podcast and you get through a few episodes and suddenly reality kicks in as to, first of all, how much work is involved, and second, how much work is necessary to build up a listenership over time. And it just requires consistent effort. And, you know, if you're doing that as a side to your day job and with all the other pressures, I guess, it does take quite a while to do. So, no, I didn't realise it. And I'm kind of doing it at the moment in seasons, just to sort of concentrate that effort during the year so that I can do other things, like, for example, go out paddling, because if there's one thing that makes you not go out paddling, it's hosting a paddling podcast, because you're just spending all the time producing and planning and so on. So that at least gives me a part of the year where I can go out and actually get on the water.
So you've sort of settled into a rhythm of how it works for you, and it has to, doesn't it? It's not your day job. It's something you do for the love, a little bit like SUP Junkie, and you have to settle into that rhythm. There were a couple of years where I didn't paddle because I was so invested in my love for the other side of it, the media and you know, showing all these wonderful people off to other people, that I lost my way with my paddling. And you've clearly settled into that rhythm. You do your seasons so that you know that in certain times you can actually get on the water, which is where you meet the people that you talk about and the people that you interview, and it's all about those connections, isn't it? So it's a really it is a skill, and we have talked about the hard work. We'll maybe cross that in another episode. That could be a very long episode about the amount of work that we put into these things. Let's go back to that first episode. Can you remember who your first guest was? Can you remember about the process of recording and how it felt? Were you nervous? Talk me through that very first episode.
Well, I don't really want to listen back to that very first episode because, you know, even listening to ones that I've recorded with all of the time and investment, I don't think there's one episode which I'm 100% happy with. But I think the lesson there and the really important thing that Nick brought to it was, you know, screw it, just go ahead and do it. And that's what we did. So I was using a very poor kit in an area which had lots of reverb, and we hadn't really decided about what we were going to discuss before we started. And I think it's one of those misconceptions about podcasts that some of the conversations, they just happen organically. Sometimes they do, but also you need to have some sort of shape to the conversation. Otherwise it doesn't go anywhere and you don't end up exploring all the interesting stuff. So yeah, I think it was probably a little bit of whiffling on that first one. But the first interview we did was a guy called Dave from Roatan Paddle Sports in Honduras, and
how unique!
I know, I know, and again credit to Nick for getting these guests. And he was a Canadian who had relocated to Honduras and spent a lot of time on his hammock and the rest of the time teaching SUP. So that was was a good chat. But that first season of interviews was a real education for us. And I think we've got one interview in there, 17-minute interview talking about SUP yoga, which was essentially down to, first of all, us not doing our preparation and crafting enough questions about SUP yoga, also our ignorance about SUP yoga, and we ran out of questions very, very quickly on that one. So that was a lesson that I've taken into everything.
Yeah, good. Well, that's how we grow, isn't it? We learn from our mistakes, and you're constantly going back. I'm sure you do it. I do it a lot. You go back and you go, oh gosh, what was I thinking? You can wing it sometimes, but often it's better just to, and that again is all about that taking up the time, isn't it? It's the research as well that goes into it. So 10 years, over 100 episodes. I think I've listened to most of those, Simon, in the gym. Which do you have a favourite? I know we shouldn't. It's a bit like children, isn't it? You shouldn't have a favourite. But do you have one, maybe not your favourite, but one that really stands out to you as either you did your job very, very well, or it was the guest that really brought something to the party?
Well, without being too cheesy, it's never about me. It's all about the guest and trying to get the interesting stuff out of their story. But
you've got to be on your game to be able to do that. So that's sort of what I'm saying, is you need to be fully engaged and on point to bring out the best in your guests. So, it's not about you, but it is. You're the one who's doing it, and you do it very, very well. So
thank you very much. So generally, my favourite episode is the one that I've just recorded, because one of the privileges of being able to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with people is it's sort of quite an intimate experience, talking to one about your passion. Inevitably, you get all sorts of connections from having those conversations. So yeah, that's my favourite. I think that the ones most recently that have stuck out for me is Rylee Walker, who suffers from cystic fibrosis and has been the most incredible warrior on the crossing. Used to be known as Paddle for the Cure, but someone suffering from cystic fibrosis, and discussing with her what that actually means from a day-to-day basis and various different cycles of suffering that she has to get through, but that single-minded focus on training and being the best that she could be. I've read that you've said that CF has been both a challenge and a blessing to you. I mean, it's a lot to deal with, but could you just explain a bit more about that, really, and how it's affected you personally?
Yeah. For me, cystic fibrosis has always been a way for me to find and do something bigger with my life. People are given these challenges and they're dealt these cards that really just, you can take them either way. You can take it as a positive or a negative. And I decided with mine, I'm going to take it as a positive, because God blesses people with those challenges to inspire others, and he gives them to the strongest warriors. And I felt my calling when I was younger, and I was like, you know what? In high school, my friend and I, we hosted a cystic fibrosis walk in our hometown. Leading from that, I started getting really involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in Oklahoma and became an adult ambassador. So I just started finding this passion and this love and connecting with people with cystic fibrosis to help them find this passion as well, and then now getting involved in Piper's Angels the last 4 years, my life has completely changed. I heard about it. I didn't really know a lot about it. But knowing that I had something bigger to give, not knowing what it was at the time, and here I am now in my life doing as exactly what I dreamt of, is amazing. But 5 years ago, I actually was at the National Cystic Fibrosis Conference, and I met Travis Suits for the first time. And from that moment on, I had an instant connection with him, and I just knew there was something there, something I could give and something I can do. And then, 2.5 years later, I'm paddling across the ocean. I'm part of this group. I'm part of this event. I volunteer. And I'm now an intern for the foundation too. So I just have fully invested my life into helping people with CF, because as growing up, I didn't have that person to rely on to talk about these things. I didn't feel that community in that group. And I feel like that's my passion, and that drive is to bring people together from all walks of life, all over the United States, the world, in the cystic fibrosis community and without, to find their potential and bring that happiness and joy into their life, even if it's even if it's forcing someone, like my friend, I met him through my job, and I told him, I was like, you and I are going to be friends. And next thing you know, he's paddling across the ocean, you know? So I never had that leadership or that love or that someone that just really wanted to push me to be better. Like I always had to push myself, to be like, I had to push myself individually. I had family and friends that really were supportive, but deep down, like when you have cystic fibrosis, you grow up a lot faster, in my opinion, because of life expectancy and the idea of that cystic fibrosis is so unpredictable. Here I am right now on this podcast. Tomorrow I could be in a hospital bed. You know, you never know what could happen. And I just wanted to find a way to help people realize that tomorrow is a brand new day of light and joy. And you need to take that and be blessed with that to like do these big, crazy events or do these things that you always dreamed of, because there's people in the hospital bed that are praying and fighting for their lives to do this. I went down to Florida in March of 2021 to train for the crossing. And I was there for 3 days. Never set foot on the ocean in a paddleboard in my entire life. Did it take me a couple times to stand up? Yes. But once I found that balance and that drive to want to like get better at it, my heart skyrocketed. I found something new, a new challenge I can push myself with. And where I am at now in my life, like I'm still learning so many techniques and so many ways to paddle and how to get my paddle stroke stronger and faster. And it's, would I say it's one of my top favorite things in the world? No, being truthfully honest, but the drive to just want to fight and get better at it and like fresh something with it, you know, something that was new and just conquer something. That's really what's like driving me to paddleboard right now.
I mean, sometimes when I'm in conversations, my jaw drops to the point where I just forget that I'm interviewing someone and just absolutely there in the moment. And that was certainly one of those experiences. And there are plenty of other people, you know, who are similar to her, you know, Dean Dunbar, Kate Allett, Wilbur Henner, all paddling with significant sort of breaks on their ability, but still doing it and enjoying it. In terms of the super athletes, Chris Burtish, I mean, you can't really do better than paddling across the Atlantic. My personal idol is Bart de Zwart. Me and Nick, back when we started it, we said once we've interviewed Bart de Zwart, we'll then hang up our microphones because we will have achieved it then. So I didn't, thankfully, and Candice Appleby as well, who is, you know, just absolutely the greatest of all time, bar none, as an all-round sportswoman, and, you know, phenomenally impressive.
Yeah, I mean, she's one of my favourites, and I certainly have my favourites, but going back to the one with Rylee, it was a very emotional, and you could hear it. I mean, you know, I could hear your jaw drop, so I was gone quite quiet, but also very emotional to talk to those people and just to know the hardships and you know, they're doing what we love.
Yeah.
You know, we love it, and it's relatively easy for us. But yeah, some incredible people that you've spoken to, Simon, for sure. We'll come on to the SUP racing, which is obviously my passion, a bit later. What is you've been in the game for a long time. What's your perspective on the sport and the SUP industry right now? That's a very big question, I know.
It is a huge question, and the industry's been through, you know, quite a time over the last 5 years. It's always been the fastest growing water sport in the world, certainly from the point that I got involved in it, and that absolutely accelerated in 2021 post-pandemic, which also coincided with a time where, you know, you could pick up boards for, you know, £200 and
£50,
less.
Yes.
So then it became a mass sport, which I don't think has necessarily done a huge amount of good in terms of rescues and sort of safety, people just going out there for a float. But I think that has provided an opportunity for the industry, the governing bodies, to be able to pick up more of those potential paddlers. And I'm not sure whether the governing bodies were ready for that. I mean, if you're talking about the UK, Paddle UK picked up the sport, a couple of years after the pandemic, so I can't blame them for that. But I think there are a lot of stand-up paddle boards out there, and our mission on the podcast has always been to try and provide people with options and ideas. So, you do racing, how about adventure? You do adventure, how about racing? And that's why we've spread our episodes out to try and engage with some of those beginners as well. So we've done seasons on racing and just sort of basic skills, introduction to safety, all of that sort of stuff at various times. So we don't lose sight of the fact that there are lots of newbies listening, and obviously what I try and do is to make the content appropriate to them, unless we go down a huge rabbit hole around racing, in which case probably only us and about 100 people in the UK would understand what we're going on about.
Yeah, but hopefully you can cross-pollinate over to those beginners, which is my mission in life, is to, if one listens and has been inspired. I know that my talks with you actually and other people, and my passion for racing and where I came from or didn't come from, has actually, I've met two girls who it really did inspire them to have a go, and they're still both racing. That gives me a huge amount of joy. So, it's about drip feeding and that other information, isn't it? So, and the adventure stuff. I mean, you've covered some crazy adventurers. There've been some really good podcasts. Okay. So let's hit on a subject that is very close to my heart. And I think I've dragged you a little bit into it more by getting you to join me on the mic, which has been an absolute pleasure. SUP racing, goodness me, we've seen it peak and flow. What are your thoughts on it? I don't think you've ever done it, have you? Hey.
I have, yes.
Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. The Hamble or something, maybe? It
was Key Haven with the New Forest Paddle Sports. I was actually a pretty useful sprinter.
Good. I thought you hadn't, and I was just about to tell you off. You've interviewed some great racers. Kai Lenny I listened to the other day. Candice Appleby, April Zilg, famously, she's just brilliant. What are your thoughts on SUP racing at the moment? Because right at this very minute, and people will know when this is being recorded, will know that there may be just a little bit of a change going on. That's how I feel, and I know that we've talked about it. It did explode, back in the day when Chris Parker was, Mr. SUP racer, who's been a huge inspiration to me, was covering it. There was a huge amount of money thrown into this new sport of SUP racing. And there were some epic races around the world, really huge battles on the ocean and whatever. The money seems to have gone out of it for SUP racing currently. So what are your thoughts?
Well, so I have a lot of thoughts. So first of all, starting from the top, I think there was no one gets excited when you talk about governance of the sport, but there was a decision made in 2020-21 about who actually governs the sport in terms of Olympics and racing, who takes the lead on that. And that was signed out to ISA. I think there is a huge responsibility, having won that, ability to really push SUP as a sport. And my view, as things stand, unless there's huge amounts going on in the background, and I really hope there doesn't seem to have been a huge amount of focus on the Olympics getting SUP included into the Brisbane Olympics as a new sport. Now, I have some sympathy with ISA about why they might find that difficult, because there's some new guidance from IOC where they say, well, you've got to swap out another sport for the new sport, and that's a problem because they've only got one sport in there. But I still think there are opportunities for discussion with ICF and collaboration. There's lots of ways, if that organisation has SUP as a priority or one of their priorities, they can start having those conversations. But I don't know where they are with it, and indications from back channels and background briefings I've had from people who might know, there doesn't seem to be much activity at all, which worries me. And while Olympics is not everything, it is something. And if it's in the Olympics, then that means international bodies are more likely to put money behind their own teams, and then there's an end product or a landmark event. So I think ISA need to really get on with getting that in, or hand it over and get the ICF to deal with it. Reality, that's never going to happen because there's egos and everything involved, but you would want to think that people do have the sports topmost in mind, and it does make me feel slightly disappointed where I see sort of international and UK athletes, like your Candice Applebys or Michael Booth or the young paddlers who are coming through in the UK at the moment. They are top class athletes, and they will not have the ability and the opportunity to paddle at the Olympics. And I think that's an absolute crying shame for them. So that's one thing.
One thought.
One thought. I think the other thought about racing is, how do we feed it? So a sport gets lots of momentum from being new and a novelty, which is where it was with SUP Racer and Red Bull and all of those investments there, APP. Now it's got a bit more mature. This is where the grind really goes in. So there needs to be a proper focus on who you bring in as new racers. And I think there are difficulties with bringing young racers in because there's kit costs and, probably no early teenager worth their salt would want to spend a lot of time in cold water, certainly around here. So I think there needs to be a lot of perspiration in that area. But and then the final thought I have, which is a bit more self-serving and related to the sort of work we do, is that if racing doesn't get any coverage, does it make a sound? And what I mean by that is, you can have fantastic races all across the country, but part of the benefit of having those races is to talk about them and to share the buzz and the atmosphere and the sort of ethos you experience, and to attract more people into it. And an example of where that really works well is our first SUP 12, where we stayed on the mic for more than 12 hours talking about the race. And that had a huge impact, live streaming that had a huge live impact on the number of people who took part the following year because they saw how much fun it was. So it's really important, that coverage, and race directors should be aware of its value, because apart from a couple of Facebook posts, people are just not going to really know about it and experience it. It's that whole experience, that fear of missing out, which drives people to come in and try it.
There's nothing more exciting than looking that's where I started, watching Chris Parker do the live feed. That's where I was inspired to look at these races. Admittedly, they were all around the world, but that's where I saw my heroes, and that's what made me want to race. That's what then made me want to go up to London to meet these paddlers. They were my heroes, and they're very, very normal, which is very lovely, because you never think they're going to be, but they are just normal, just like you and I. But you're absolutely right. SUP 11 Cities Tour did a post just this week about the media, their media, and how important it is for everybody within that group, that team. They bring all the action and they do some fantastic coverage and photographs. It's in the back of Beyond.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have the live stream, if we didn't have the videos, if we didn't have the photographs, that race wouldn't be known about, and it's so important to get that information out, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it just having thrown some shade over ISA, now I want to pump up their tyres a bit, because their coverage of the World Championship back in November, wasn't it, or October, was absolutely stunning. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. And your friend Matty from Total SUP did a great job on the boat there. But that is the thing that brings things alive. And if you've got that coverage, then you're going to attract far more people into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fear of missing out is a huge thing. And going back to the youngsters as well, I know you're talking about getting into cold wetsuits and whatever, you're talking about here. But abroad, Greece, Spain, Italy, they have got young talent absolutely coming out their ears from the 12-year-old to the 18-year-old. They have got such a strong junior contingent, and that is what I would really love for this country. But we have been trying for years to get those youngsters engaged. We've had one or two, we've had the Holly Pines, we've had the Blue, I'm not going to mention them all, and that doesn't mean to say that none of the others are relevant, because they are. But we need more. How do we do that? And I do think, the weather has a huge impact on, wanting to get out there. But people are working on it. It will still be worked on, and it will be, let's have this conversation in another year's time and just see if there are any changes.
Absolutely. And just to finish off on that one, and we had a conversation before we started recording about this. So some of the examples, certainly in the UK, that you mentioned are water families, come from people who have a significant amount of water experience. So it's not surprising that they would come into the sport. The question is, how do we engage those people outside? So, that there is an attitude sometimes within governance and everything else where, build it and they will come, we'll just have a few races, we'll supply a few boards. That may or may not pick up people. I think you need to get into a real pathway. And obviously that's difficult because it's the governing body who would need to take a lead on that. And frankly, why would the governing body do that if there isn't the attraction of Olympics or high profile events in there as well? Yeah. So it's going to be very difficult. But yes, I know it is on people's lists. They are taking action, and I hope they will attract more young people into the sport. Yeah,
we've got a couple of youngsters who we're keeping our eye on, but we need more. We need more of you. So just let's finish on the racing. Favourite racing podcasts that you've done, people that you've spoken to, who have been your favourites?
Well, I mentioned Candice several times. She's just an absolute superstar, and has been for a number of years, evergreen paddler, incredible. And Michael Booth as well. And one of the common factors, with Michael Booth and Candice and April and all of the people that I've spoken to, is about bringing a beginner's mindset to things. And I suppose that's a theme that's run all the way through the podcast, from beginner to experience. You've got to have done your apprenticeship. You've got to have made the mistakes. You've got to have gone out in certain conditions that test your boundaries. And, if you're not doing that, then, you're not likely to improve. There's a phrase that my friend Sean came out with while I was sort of doing instruction at his business, which I love, which is, if you're not getting wetter, you're not getting better. So moving around on your board and, nose 360s and just testing your edges, then you're just at one level and you're going to struggle in a race situation. So it applies to racing, it applies to life in general.
When 2016 rolled around, I was like, right, how do I take what I've learned through my other sports and make myself into a better athlete for stand-up paddling? And that was really revolved around writing the right program for myself, writing, skill-based programs for myself to be able to get better at those components. Because I know things that I really struggled with at the start was standing on the board was a really hard thing, because I think doing sit-down sports for a long time, you use your legs, but you don't have to use the stabilizer muscles so much like you do in SUP. So I remember one of my first paddlebacks it must have been in 2014, before I started getting serious with it. And I basically couldn't paddle for more than like 500 meters on my feet, because my feet would get sore, my legs would get sore, my back would get sore. And I'd be like, I'm never going to be able to do this. Like, this is too hard. Like, physically it's impossible to get stronger at this. But I just kept like getting out there, trialing it. And I'm somebody who loves to get better at things. So it was something that, when I was out there, I was like, okay, well, next time I'm going to get better again. Then I'm going to get better again. And I love that journey of being a beginner and then becoming advanced at something. And I really enjoyed that journey. And then it also allowed me to go out and compete on that world stage, like at early 2016, and start to be really competitive in races. And that's sort of what I'd come from, being competitive athlete, and it was just all new and exciting, new people, new challenges, like learning your competition, learning the races, learning the events, and meeting all these new amazing people. So it was a pretty cool transition from, I guess, my background to stand up paddling as my main focus.
Absolutely. And when you come to something new, that learning journey is so exciting, isn't it? I guess there's a thing there about how you deal with failure and frustration if you can't do it, which I know a lot of beginners wrestle with. But, you don't come out fully formed. You've got to really work on it. And one of the things I know about your CV is you had a kind of sliding doors moment where you had the option of going into sport or going into a career as an engineer. Do you think you bring that engineer type mindset to your paddling and certainly to the technical side?
I think I do in a way. I'm always sort of evaluating like different things. Like I really try and break things down. I know, and I come out of a race and I do poorly or I don't have the result that I need to really evaluate and work out what I did wrong and how I'm going to get better.
Yeah, push those boundaries. Just before we leave, so I just have to pick up on one person, Shuri Araki, young Shuri Araki. I follow him on social media, met him a few times, absolutely amazing. Incredible multi-world champion. I think he's just 18 or maybe 19. His videos that he puts, it definitely worth following him on Instagram. Shrimpy would go.
I do, yeah.
The videos that he puts out of the body of water that he has been training on since he was about 9, and his little sister has now been training on since she's probably about 6, is unbelievable. I mean, you wouldn't pop your child out on a board in those conditions unless you were supremely confident that they are going to be okay. Their skill level is just phenomenal. So please keep an eye out for Shuri. He needs to be next on your hit list, I think, Simon.
Absolutely, and I bet he's fallen in a few times.
Multiple times, yeah. What a talented young man he is. So that's racing done for the moment. Where do we go next? Let's talk about adventure. So this has been a huge part of your podcast story, I think. I've listened to many of your guests who've done some epic adventures, huge adventures, where your jaw drops, you go, how on earth did they do that? Why did you start getting into that line? What was there one person in particular? I mean, you talk about Bart, of course, the biggest adventurer of them all. How did you get into that side of it?
Well, I've also, alongside my sporting background, I've also had a yen for adventure. So I've done all sorts of things, again, endurance related, a lot of cycling, and I've cycled some quite considerable distances. John O'Groats Land's End in 8 days, which, I wouldn't recommend necessarily, but stunning when you're going through the Highlands of Scotland and, various European tours, and I'm fairly well skilled in wild camping and all of that stuff. So using SUP as a means of exploration, it was just an area of interest because I wanted to harvest a lot of best practice. One of my first adventure episodes was an interview with the guys from SUP Border. So they were putting out quite a lot of content. So that was just guys, tell me everything, how you organise yourselves on an adventure. And then I went out, obviously quite a bit further than that, Chris Burtish, paddleboarding across the Atlantic, which was massive. And so I actually did a season on the Yukon 1000. So that one really gives you a taste of the entire end-to-end experience, because I did an interview with the race director. Then I did a pre-interview with Craig Sawyer, who's a friend of both of us, and some of the other teams who were taking part. Then I had some on-the-ground reportage that they sent in from Whitehorse in Yukon, some on the finishing line, and then a sort of cathartic final episode when they were all back at home and they were offloading and telling all of their war stories about their time on the Yukon. And you can listen to that season and basically feel like you've lived it with them. That was great fun. Okay, so day 2, the rest of the fleet started. You were heading through the Carmacks, and that night, I think Team Shack, you made it just past Five Finger Rapids. And from what I saw on the tracking, you'd found an island just sort of beyond that spot to camp
best
on.
campsite of the whole trip, one of the best.
Wow, that was going to be my next question, because I would have imagined that would have been a pretty spectacular campsite. So that was definitely it for you guys, was it?
I mean, it was a spectacular evening for us, actually. I think, the Carmax to Five Fingers stretch was a really interesting one for us. I mean, when we came into Carmax, it was bizarre because we'd not obviously, but we had been to that same spot and camped on that campsite last year. And seen some of the racers come through. And when we approached it, the banks of the river were lined with people cheering at us, which wasn't the case last year. So we weren't expecting it. It was just like, what the hell's going on here? Really, 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 really bizarre. But it turns out Glenn and Maureen had kind of whooped up the interest within the campsite and got everyone to the riverbank. And so we went through Carmax, and then out the other side of Carmax, Craigie, I think you had an off.
Capsize, my first capsize.
Yeah, first capsize. So, that stretch then was about, we know where we are. We know we could get to Five Fingers at this point. Do we go for it based on the fact that we've had an off and blah, blah, blah. And it's getting late and you've got to hit the target times and all that stuff. And after quite a long discussion around that from the pros and cons point of view, from a safety aspect more than anything, we decided to go for it and get through Five Fingers that night, which we did, which was great. That was a real kind of tick in a box for us. Five Fingers on second day is a good accomplishment as far as any racer is concerned on the race. And when we got to the other side of it, we knew we were going to come into camp. So warming up, and that was all. If we'd come off, we would have been going into camp and warming up. So it was the right decision in that moment. Equally, it's lighter at midnight than it is at 4 a.m. And the reason I say 4 a.m. is because we would have had to stop before midnight to not go through Five Fingers. So about 10 o'clock, which meant we would have had to leave at 4 o'clock. And I'm getting the maths now, Martin. It's coming to me now. I don't know where it's coming to, but we decided to go through, which means we actually landed into camp about 11:30. And we knew we were going straight into camp, and we were really lucky because it was a beautiful campsite with beavers slapping their tails around, and was there signs of bear? I don't think there was signs of bear, but there was moose prints on that campsite for sure. And there was
a rabbit and a random
rabbit. Yeah, rabbit just sat there, calm as anything, as we did all our things on the beach. He just sat there and watched us. It was brilliant. Yeah, great campsite.
And then we ate him. No, we didn't.
And what about you guys? What was your camping highlight, or were you just mission focused, tents up, food on, into bed, into the sleeping bag?
Pretty much that, actually. I mean, we didn't go on a Team Shack holiday camp, which is what that one sounded like.
It was all a holiday.
That was one of my favourites, actually, because obviously I was invested because I had three friends, I guess. Martin Rendell, he was with Kim I didn't know very well, but he's done some epic endurance adventures. And then you had Skip and Craig, from the Shack, and just really, really good. Skip especially, very, very good friend of mine. So to know, and that had been quite the journey of just getting to the start line. I mean, I think it took them 3 years or something with COVID and lockdown, and then Craig got COVID on the start line. It was just, one of those epic stories. But your episode with John, the race director, I remember something that he said, which is, I spoke about only at the weekend, actually. It's one of those lines that you remember and you draw on, where that race historically was canoe, canoe and kayak race. SUP, no, too dangerous, way too dangerous. The moment he did the test run with the SUP guys, whoever they were, he just went, hey, they are actually the least of my worries.
Exactly.
And it completely flipped this feeling of, we really shouldn't let the paddleboarders do that because it's a little bit dangerous, to, they can actually do that, and if they have to self-rescue, it's easier for them, and they seem to manage very well, and they can stand up on a board or sit down, whatever. So that's such a positive, isn't it? To change the sort of landscape of who can actually do that 1,000-mile race.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, essentially serving safety cover, and I hope we have some suppers in this year's Yukon, because I'd hoped in my small way to attract stand-up paddleboarders to the event by doing a season on it, but it seems to have done completely the opposite, and no one's entered it since.
Scared them off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's yeah, you're absolutely right. Just talking about other adventures, there's another significant adventurer who we connected on, first of all, who was Jordan Wylie. So back in COVID, he was attempting to paddleboard round the UK. I know you put him up in your flat, didn't you?
Yes.
And I had a chat with him on my local beach, and I remember running down there in my flip-flops because they had a tracker on there so you could see where he was. And I saw this guy splashing away, and I thought that can't be him. Not great.
With that technique.
Not with that technique. He's not going to make it round to the British Isles like that. And it was him. And to be fair to him, he was fairly early in his journey. But I think you suffered along with everyone else to see his journey all the way around the coast, which eventually ended round about Christmas time.
Just before Johnny Groats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just past Cape Wrath, which, the clue's in the name there. And doing that in December is not ideal for a novice paddleboarder, although by then he'd probably put
Quite
enough
experienced.
hours in to be very experienced. So, it was great to chat to him. And obviously, the great Brendan Prince, who world record holder, and has been a huge influence to both of us. So lots of adventure stuff. But what interests me in those stories is how they deal with situations and how much planning they do in advance, because everyone sees the spectacular end product where Brendan pitches up onto the beach at Torquay and has a laurel wreath around him and all of the cheering, and obviously all of that is more than warranted, but to get there it required a huge amount of preparation, training and understanding of the areas that he's paddling in, because you can't just take off and wing it.
Absolutely not. And he's a true sort of waterman, isn't he? He's lived on that, he's lived by the ocean for so many years, and he's done a lot of water sports and not necessarily just SUP. But going back to Jordan, that was a freak meeting that I had with him, and then suddenly, hearing that after just a month of paddleboarding in his entire life, he's going to head off around the UK, and just telling him he was bonkers. I would never do that with the experience that I've got. But what a story he had, and we were all so invested in him, weren't we? Because it was such an unbelievable story. I mean, there were so many times that he was on his knees because he just couldn't stand in those conditions. There's some incredible photos of him in massive waves, with this big beard, and videos of him he was living on the boat and throwing up off the side of the boat. I mean, just and gutted for him when the Scottish government pulled him off the water. It was COVID, and they just went no more. So fair play to him. He absolutely would have achieved that, that circumnavigation. But fair play to Brendan, who then just sort of stepped gently into Jordan's shoes and went, "I've got this."
Bosh, straight round.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I've made this all very male centric. But the fact that Jordan attempted it and the fact that Brendan did it, there were two women who had already gone from Land's End to John O'Groats. So Fiona Quinn and Cal Major had done that before. So at the point when Brendan had set off, it was the ladies absolutely done everything in terms of endurance and getting to the finishing line. So
they really led the way, didn't they? They sort of warmed it up for the men.
And just to cover off some of your other greatest hits, and probably the biggest one, I guess, in terms of distance, which is becoming the first person to cover the distance between Land's End to John O'Groats in 2018 by paddleboard. I mean, that was an epic trip. And as you said, that's shown in the film Vitamin C. And by the way, we'll link to all of these films in the show notes. They're available via YouTube. But at the time you did that Land's End to John O'Groats, there were two women attempting the route. There's yourself and Fiona Quinn. And that was a collective and very serious manifestation of girl power going on right there. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about sort of the strong female representation and participation within SUP, because I can't think of many sports where there have been so many really strong female role models across all flavours of the sport, really leading it and pushing the boundaries.
I'm really glad you asked that question, actually. So my first expedition, paddling around Cornwall, I knew that it could be done because 2 blokes had done it a few weeks before, and not one part of me at that point thought it's been done by guys, but could it be done by a woman? It just, I said I was really, bloody minded about things, very stubborn, but I didn't at any point in time think I need to consider the fact that I'm a woman here. And I remember so clearly sitting on the beach at Wembury, about to set off to paddle around Cornwall, and Marie Buchanan coming down to see me off, and being so unbelievably inspired by her. She was such a huge help, support, and inspiration to me getting off that beach and getting going. Because, like I said, I'd only been paddling for 18 months. There was so much I didn't know. There's so much about nutrition, about technique, about distances, about speed, there was so much I didn't know that I was about to learn. And to have Marie there to teach me, reassure me, and support me was such a huge help. And she's still a friend today, and I still feel very inspired by her every time I see her put up a picture of her paddling on the south coast in either beautiful or terribly gnarly conditions. But you're right, like this is a community that has some incredible female people, women paddlers, and not women paddlers. They're just, I think it's just a wonderful community, a wonderful supportive community. I feel really grateful for how supportive it is. And I've met a lot of people through this community, people like Joe Mosley, who's now also a good friend, and there are some real badasses doing really cool things in this community.
I have to say thank you for bringing that up. And we had Sian Sykes as well, and Lizzie Carr as well did her own sort of lengthy journeys as well, and her journey is really well and truly changed now. The girls really sort of set the scene for the boys and just took it on. And again, some incredible stories. I mean, Fiona Quinn and the Corrie Vrecken chat whirlpools, and reading that book and hearing that story of hers, and Cal Major, again, see where these ladies have ended up as well, and still paddling, still doing very, very good things. They seem to transition then into doing really, really good things for other people, based off the back of their huge success of doing something for themselves.
Absolutely. So, it's the water environment. So Cal Major is a vet, and she, has various charities.
Sort of environmentalist as well.
Exactly. And I think that's also another, I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that a bit later on, but being out there in the water, you get to see the conditions, the wildlife, and that obviously makes you care for it more.
Yeah. This is a really big question, but how do you think that your podcasts have affected other people? I mean, I know how they affect me because I listen to them and I laugh and I cry and I'm amazed at what people can do. And how do you feel that? Do you get lots of messages? Do you get any negativity? Do you get much more positivity, I'm guessing? And how do you what effect do you think it's had on your listeners? Well,
first of all, I hope they're listening to it, which is good, and it's always gratifying when you get more than X amount of listeners, and we're up to over 100,000 downloads now. So there's a number of people within our niche who are listening to it. I hope people, if they're beginners and they're listening to it, then they realise that they need to show a bit of patience and not beat themselves up if they can't stand immediately. And I think having taken to this sport relatively late in life, it means the lessons from learning it are a bit more recent, and I can understand the stages at which people get through. And I remember the frustration where I went out on the sea for the first time and I couldn't stand up, and seeing other people just effortlessly just flowing with the motion of the water. And that can only happen if you spent the time falling off and then getting used to it. And so it's just the time on the board there which is really important. I think from a safety point of view, it's just addressing some of the misapprehensions about adventure and people doing spectacular stuff. They're only doing spectacular stuff because they've done that apprenticeship. They understand the conditions. You know, if it's a jackass type competition where it's, 10-foot high surf and you're going out for the first time and you're bored, that's not going to come off very well. It doesn't matter how courageous you are. If you don't have the skills and the understanding, you're not going to do very well in that environment. So it's about serving up that subtle safety message throughout everything as well, so that people can sort of gradually assimilate that, because no one generally comes to the content for a safety briefing.
No, they don't. That's true. But if you can drip feed it in and make people realise that, it is hugely important. We've both been involved quite heavily in safety with the RNLI and Paddle UK. But you have done a couple of, standalone safety podcasts, haven't you?
Yeah.
And that, that is relevant. They might be your least listened to, I don't know. But, let's hope that a beginner might find those and just, cherry pick little nuggets of advice that you throw in there. So.
Yeah. Well, funny you should mention that, because it is probably, one of them is probably the least listened, but one of them is the most listened. So I did an interview with someone who I happened to play rugby with back in the day, called Mike Tipton, Professor Mike Tipton, the king of cold water safety. Whenever there's a TV programme about it, they trot him out, and he's been on all sorts of sort of high-level broadcasts. But that insight about cold water and the effect on the body is the most listened to episode that we've got, which is quite something, really. And just to mention that, again, when Nick was still involved, I launched an online safety course. So we recognised back in 2021 that there were a lot of people coming into the sport and not much instruction. So we put together multi-module course talking about advice in various different areas, and we kept it nice and tight on all of them, just focused on all of the stuff you really need to know. And that's still available, probably linked in the show notes of this episode.
In the show notes below, as they say on the podcast. Going back to Mike Tipton, I mean, you've got a double whammy there, because I'd listened to that. I think I listened to it recently for the second time, because it's fascinating. You want to remind yourself of the information that he's giving you, because it is scientifically led, isn't it? But you're covering, you're not only covering paddleboarders with that cold water information, you've got, the huge growth of cold water swimming, wild swimming, that as well, haven't you? So that covers all bases, which is great. So he's definitely got some good information in there. It's a fun interview, that one. I liked it.
It is. It's good. I had a lot of fun. And one of the things I talked about in there was I was actually a research guinea pig for him back in the day when I was a student. And that was my best paid student job, but also my most miserable student job, because apart from wearing an internal thermometer, and I will draw a discrete line under where that might have been situated, floating in a tub of cold water for up to 2 hours at a time, shivering, it's very boring, but it's also not that pleasant. And I had to do 6 or 7 rounds of that. So yeah, but we did have a laugh when we were doing that. But no, that one is very much dear to my heart. The other one about survival and safety, and I don't think it's had as many downloads as its warranty, is Lawrence Gonzalez, Surviving Survival, his book. And he is absolutely the expert in survival situations across a variety of sports, and how people get themselves into trouble by just not thinking. And I'm endlessly fascinated by that, because you can see its example in pretty much any incident that there has been out there. People going out with all the best intentions, invisible dangers, not realizing, and then two or three things go wrong, and then it ends in tragedy. So that is another episode that I really would encourage people that listen to it. And that also was a chat with lots of different examples of different scenarios. So yeah, that's also one of my favourites. Yeah. Obviously, that there's a pattern of accidents, and there are also human factors around the way that the brain works, which leads to people putting themselves in unnecessary risk. And I just wondered if you could run us through the story about the Canadian snowmobilers who were out on a search and rescue mission and ended up in a fatal incident as a result of some of those human factors.
Well, this incident involves snowmobilers who, as you say, were out on a rescue themselves, trying to find some people who had gone out earlier. And so you would think that they would have had a different mindset, let's say. But they're out there in the mountains. It's beautiful. It's a gorgeous day. Powder up to your eyeballs. They're on these fast snowmobiles that growl and scream, and speed and G-forces and all the things that excite a human are influencing that emotional part of their brain that I was talking about earlier. And so as they set out, more and more emotion comes into play, and they get literally dumber and dumber as they go. And at the outset, they had a briefing that said, okay, just everybody, there's an avalanche danger out there. There's going to be no high marking today. That's where you run your snowmobile way up the mountain and see how high you can leave your mark, because you're going to trigger an avalanche and somebody's going to get hurt. So no high marking today. And they all agreed, yes, yes. And as the emotion got higher and higher and higher, sure enough, one of the guys cut loose up the mountain to make his high mark. And another one, I believe, followed, if I'm remembering correctly. And they triggered an avalanche, and they killed a couple of people. And so in the follow-up to this accident, where you've got these trained people on a mission, got the correct briefing, had the information, everything was right to do it right, and they did it wrong. And that is a lesson we should all take to heart, because we are just like they are. And the thing that you need to do when you're in a position like that is to recognize how emotion gets out of control, to literally force yourself not to go in that direction, and to do things, to take steps along the way to calm down those emotions if they start to get too high. And that means stopping, talking, drinking water, perhaps having something with sugar in it to up your blood sugar, but taking deliberate steps to say, hey guys, now we're really out here. Now let's make sure we do the right thing. And it does work when you bother to take the time to do those things, and when you're aware. So you have to know, first of all, that this thing is a trap for you, and you have to believe it. And the unfortunate thing is, to make a believer out of you often takes a near miss. And some of those near misses turn into fatalities.
I remember listening to that, actually. I wasn't particularly drawn to it because, it's funny, isn't it? You look at a name, you go, well, I don't know who that is. And it's almost like a little barrier. But if you can get past that barrier, I listened and I just like, that is the take he has on danger and what can lead to accidents is very different, isn't it, to our normal, oh, it looks nice out there, let's go out, and then we have an accident. It's much more deep. The explanations, it is really fascinating to listen to his take. I mean, he talks about a whitewater situation. It's just the way he words it and how he explains it. It's just very, very different and fascinating. So yeah, listen to that one, folks. Sure.
And the reason why I got on to Lawrence Gonzalez is having read a previous book, which I was recommended by the chairman of the Colorado River Surfing Association, bit niche there, but he contacted me immediately after the Haverfordwest incident to say there needs to be work now to understand the reasons and the causes, and for that to be properly communicated. And, you know, I'm not sure whether the true learnings of that have been spread quite as wide as they could be, certainly the behavioural things. But one of the books that he recommended I read is something called Avalanche Risk in the Backcountry. So coming from the Colorado River Association, that's even more random. But I did take that book and I did read it. And there are a lot of shared risks in all water environments. And that there are lots of circumstances where people have been killed in the backcountry by avalanches from people who are actually avalanche rescuers, from just seeing a patch of virgin snow and wanting to drive up it on their snowmobile, regardless of them
knowing the risks.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and doing it. Because there is a very sort of short connection between thrill seeking and just going for it. So it's about parking that and how we manage that, well, bugger it, I'm just going to do it anyway, which was a bit of what the Haverfordwest thing was.
Very much
just
so.
completely disregarding anything and having, you know, God knows what the reasons are for doing it. You can but guess. Obviously, if she'd known how it ended up, I'm sure she wouldn't have gone. But you have to scan and look at all of the likelihood of those incidents happening. And it was pure ignorance, and I think probably a bit of hubris that led to that. You've got a huge responsibility if you're running those sorts of trips, and if in doubt, you don't go out.
Yeah, we our club leader Brian, who, you know, we go off and we do a periodic whitewater run on a fairly benign river, but it cannot be benign as well. And the last time we went, it was raging, and we drove the length of it. It's not very far, and it can be done in an hour and a half. It's just beautiful down on Exmoor. And we looked at it, and normally we travel down together. We can stop, we can look after each other. We've got throw lines that we can help each other out. I just knew that there was no way that A, would be able to travel together, B, would be able to stop. And what was the point in taking a tow line? Because we would not be able to stop and use it. So we all pulled out. We all took that sort of collective stance that there was no point. It was too risky. And what Brian said is, you know, and we travelled a long way, a 3-hour journey. We'd stayed the night before, we were staying the night after. It's great to spend time with friends, but we made a big effort, you know, taking this time out of our diary. It's not a weekend. And Brian's sort of stance is, you've got to imagine this trip. We are standing here now, and it's just a couple of miles from home. What would we do? Of course we'd call it off. But because we've made so much effort to get here and take time out and be away, and it's been a big plan, that's the danger, because that is when people say, no, come on, let's do it. We've made all this effort. Don't, just pull out, you know. It's very, very hard, but it has to be like that.
Absolutely.
Cannot afford it to be any other way.
And as human beings, we make decisions through emotion, and then we justify it with logic. That's the way that our brains work. So we need to be aware that our emotions aren't necessarily the most effective way of making decisions, particularly in those safety environments. Effective decision making when your emotions are kicking in is something really important to be aware of. And what Brian said, absolutely right. You know, there might be lots of other things going on in the environment that you might not be aware of. There might be strainers down there.
Oh, there was all of that.
I mean, it's just not worth it.
No.
And you know, if you take that to the extremes, you get the situation in Haverfordwest, which was, you know, an absolute tragedy.
Yeah. Yes, that is absolutely, yes, as you've said. So, well, let's move on to more the sort of mental health. We know that, you know, we've got this blue and green therapy, and this has become such a huge thing, hasn't it, over the past, I don't know, 5-10 years maybe. And paddleboarding has properly fed into that, hasn't it? Or it's fed into paddleboarding, being on the water. I know myself. I mean, Anthony will periodically say to me, Sarah, do you think you need to go and get on the water? It's this subtle way of saying, go and have some chill out time and just, you know, come back maybe a better person, I don't know. You have interviewed some people along those lines, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
So again, how did you get into that? What was your feeder for that? It must have been, I'm guessing, a book you read or someone you met. So who was that person?
Well, there's a lot of people who've published in that area. I've got a long-standing interest in psychology. I did it at university. Don't necessarily advertise this fact, but I did a hypnotherapy training course, NLP, all of that sort of stuff, just from an interest point of view, rather than to turn anyone into a chicken. Yeah, don't worry. Sarah's looking nervous.
Maybe turned into a chicken.
But Wallace J. Nichols was the person and the book which really sparked my interest in this area. But I kind of knew it anyway, and I think people know it anyway when they're on the water.
Mm.
You get a sense of satisfaction and calm from basically spending time in the water environment. I harassed you on email for quite some time to get you on, and it's a great honour to have you on the podcast, because your book, Blue Mind, has been a really influential one for so many people across the world, and it's been a particular favourite amongst our listeners to the show. And there aren't many episodes or interviews which don't at some point touch on some of the subjects that you raise directly or indirectly in your book. So it's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks for your persistence. I'm definitely a harassable person, so thanks for sticking with it.
Well, it's a pleasure. So with this question, I feel like I'm immediately treating the book and yourself in a really superficial way. But if you were describing the book to someone at a party who maybe hadn't come across it, how would you describe it to them?
Well, the book's called Blue Mind, and the phrase is a pair of words that describes something that I think we've all felt throughout our lives, but couldn't quite explain. So the book is an attempt to start to explain this feeling that we get when we're with water in any of its forms and in any of the activities that are available to do, whether it's a shower or a bath in your home, or jumping in a pool, or paddling, and all the other things we can do on boats and underwater and scuba and diving, all those things. And there's a unique feeling that water brings, and I've felt it my whole life. I've been fortunate in that way, and wanted to describe it as from the perspective of a scientist, I guess. So that's really what the book is about, is that feeling. And there have been a lot of books about the way water feels, but most of them have been more in the realm of poetry and prose rather than the science of the feeling. And so I guess that's what may make it unique. But it's caught on that the words Blue Mind have become useful in the way that I'd hoped in naming this mind state that we encounter when we're near, in, on, or underwater. And that's great. It's great to be able to give something a name, because then we can talk about it better, and we can value it more, and we can prescribe it and protect it, prioritize that feeling, because it's so important. So that wasn't short enough. I wish I had given you a shorter answer at that that elevator pitch, but long elevator. Right?
And what Wallace J. Nichols said, so he's a marine biologist. Sadly, we lost him a couple of years ago. He was starting a movement and basically pulling together all of the research that had happened in lots of different areas, but around Blue Mind, as he called it, and the benefits it gives. And there's an evolutionary reason for that. Water's very important to us, and we all feel it whenever we're on the water, that sort of calm environment. The other group where it makes quite a difference is the SUP Vets. So it's an American charity who run trips for veterans. Obviously, veterans struggle for all sorts of reasons psychologically when they come out of the services. Sometimes it's PTSD. Sometimes it's just losing that certainty about the world that they're operating on into the wide world, which is slightly less forgiving and slightly less structured. And that was a really interesting chat with some sort of apex level military veterans, really extolling the virtues of water. You could generally see those guys as being fairly hard-nosed, not particularly woke, but they saw the value in action. And I know that there are other charities who follow that same path. So, yeah, very interested in all of that. But just in general terms, the mental health issues in the military are renowned, and an environment which provides that perfect storm, because you've got a bunch of mostly guys. As we know, men in general aren't good at talking, seeking help, or admitting any weaknesses. Then you've got the training. So military training, mission focused, manning up. You know, there is a need to repress emotions within the military culture for the sort of stuff you have to do. And then you've got the trauma that you experience, physical and mental, when you're out there, all of the sort of mayhem of conflict and all of the extreme experiences on active service. So when you're in the bubble with your buddies, you get some support there, you get each other, you've got common experiences there, but it's all very much repressed. And then when you get back home, it can all start bubbling out. So really, there's not a worse combination, because on one hand, you've got a serious need for help, and then on the other side, you've got a barrier to seeking help. Does that kind of sum up the mental health situation? And what's your experience of coming across that sort of culture and those sorts of difficulties?
No, I think you did a really nice job of summarizing. So I definitely won't try to add any color there. Here's the other part that I think occurs, and the three of us have talked about this a lot, to be honest with you. So you come out of the military, and you're right, there is a brotherhood. And even if we're not the most highly functional brotherhood, you do know that people have your back. And then you make a transition to civilian time, whether it's after 5 years for me, a full career for Wes, or kind of in between for Bart, is you do kind of, no matter how connected we may be as a society in the modern day, you do disconnect yourself from the tightness of that brotherhood, the daily interaction, in a personal face-to-face manner. And so at some point, I think every transition and veteran finds themselves somewhat alone. It's just in that process. And some of us, I'll speak for myself, some of us are lucky enough in the civilian sector to find brotherhood. Other people are not as lucky. And so they tend to, they're swimming against the current, that you get tired and you can run into problems there. And we, in our world here, we see the ramifications of swimming against the current alone a lot. And I lost a West Point classmate last week. I mean, we're 20 plus years out of the academy. We're in our mid 40s. People look like they have the world as their oyster. Families, kids that are doing great, etc. And then the reality is unknowingly they're swimming against the current and they get tired. And these things happen.
And we were mentioning about Jordan Wiley earlier on, and he had omitted to either bring or take his antidepressants at certain parts of his journey, and he felt that he didn't need to take them at that point. Now, that's not a clinical example that everyone should take lessons from, but it did show that there were clearly some effects from being on the water.
Yeah, you have just stolen my story, because I was just waiting for you to finish so that I could bring up that Jordan story. Openly suffers from PTSD, not through his life in the army, but through personal matters. And yes, he forgot to take his pills and managed all the way around without them. I mean, that's just such a story, because he, the stress levels that he would have been dealing with during that time, but a whole new different level of stress. So, and you're right. I think we know this. It's almost like just a connection, isn't it? You can't really explain that going on the water and being calm, because it's not just about that. It's if you've surfed or you've been thrown about in the white water or whatever, it's still the same. It's just this connection, isn't it, that we have with the water. and how it makes us feel.
And there's another aspect as well, which Kate Allett, who I mentioned earlier on. So Kate Allett suffered from locked-in syndrome. So she was basically in a bed, unmoving, unable to move any part of her body. And at one point, the medical people asked her husband whether or not they should switch off the ventilator that she was being supported on. And she was there within her own head, listening to everything that was going on. But one of the themes of her recovery, and more generally to the learning experience and everything that we've talked about, is something called neuroplasticity, which is in the brain. It works as a muscle. And to develop skills or movement, it's all about making connections between different areas of the brain. And if it's difficult, that's kind of quite good for making those connections to start with, and then you gradually complete that action again and again and again, and it builds up these connections in the brain, these myelin sheaths in there that connect everything together and make everything seamless. So if anyone has practiced anything over a period of time and you get better, that's what's happening in your brain. What she was doing was trying to make a connection with her big toe while she was lying in bed, and trying to move that big toe by really concentrating on it. And her recovery story is absolutely incredible. And she managed to get down there. She managed to move a big toe. Then she managed to get out and walking. And then the next big challenge for her was stand-up paddleboarding, which has been another great therapy for her. So it doesn't matter whether it's sort of psychological benefit, learning new skills from beginner, being a first-time racer. It's all about building up that mechanical connection. And if you know that that's what's happening, that way you can cut yourself a bit of slack if you're falling in, because you can say, oh yeah, it's just that thing. It's just my body getting used to it. I just need to do this enough times, and then I'll be where I want to be.
Yeah. There is that little saying that I referenced over the weekend. What is it? What is it about sucking at something new? Be prepared to suck at something new.
Exactly.
And then that builds up all that you're talking about until you get those skills. It's like muscle memory. It's the muscle memory in here too. It's not just this muscle memory.
Exactly. And Michael Booth was very much into that. And he absolutely loves being a beginner at things. That was the quote I got from him. And he was starting to build a new house. And he never built a house before. Hopefully he had some advice while he was doing it. But it's about learning new skills and just building up those bits of the brain. And I think that's such an important to learn, not just for SUP and whatever you want to achieve in SUP, but for life in general.
Life, absolutely. I need to take a leaf out of Michael's book, actually. The environment. SUP is a huge part of this, isn't it, now? Because we've had people like Lizzie Carr, Cal Major, Fiona Quinn, probably, other people who have really brought the state of our rivers to the forefront. Lizzie Carr, MBE, to Parliament. The work that she's done has just been absolutely exemplary and fascinating. And we'd like to thank you, Lizzie, for all that you have done and are continuing to do to highlight the state of our rivers and our oceans. We're sat here by the sea, you and I today. Looks amazing. It's wild, but can you talk to me about what you feel about the environment and the good work that some of your guests have brought to the table in regard to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Lizzie's a really great example, and she was one of the earliest woman to do a long distance journey, because she paddled the canals of the UK from as far south as you can go to as far north as you can go. And I remember following her trip as she did it. She identified lots of sort of visible plastic pollution as she went. And what she identified is it's all very well doing cleanups and so on, but if no one knows about it, you're just going to be dealing with the same problem the following week. So her charity, which started as Plastic Patrol and now is Planet Patrol, had an app where they encouraged people to log the stuff that they had found. And what they could do with that is they could go back to Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Mars or whatever and say, look, we've had a ton of your stuff ended up in canals, which we've had to remove. What are you going to do about it? And if you can provide people with actual evidence, then that's a really important way of making them change their habits. So she made a huge contribution there. Where that's evolved to, obviously there's litter and rubbish that we can see, but it's the stuff that we can't see, which is more frightening. So I did an interview with 3 scientists from University of Portsmouth, and one of them was a marine biologist who was testing the chemicals in rivers. So, and what he had picked up as part of his monitoring was the amount of contraceptive hormones that had come out of the pill and obviously come through sewage works and out. I know in some rivers there's quite a large amount of cocaine derivatives and so on in there as well. But if you think about those chemicals and how they're affecting the wildlife, I mean, the fish might swim a little bit quicker, but I'm sure it doesn't do them any good. But also the effects of those hormones on their bodies as well. And just finally, again with Lizzie Carr, we both went out for a very enjoyable couple of days on Race for Rivers, which was a campaign to look into sulfates and all of those sorts, E. coli and all of that sort of chemicals that are being washed into rivers and the general health of the rivers, which is her next phase of focus. But I think what we do as stand-up paddleboarders is we get to appreciate the environment a bit more and value it because we're on it and we see it more, whereas most people just see it from the land. The thrill of seeing a kingfisher, flying along, or a seal surfacing in the sea down here, all of those experiences of wildlife are really, really special, and we're going to lose those opportunities if we continue to make the water as polluted as it is at the moment. So we've all got a real responsibility to share our voices and to try and make some of these water companies smarten up their act.
Absolutely. And also to just do what you can, because sometimes I feel really empowered and I think, yes, we can save the world together. And other days I just look and go, what is me picking up one plastic bottle going to do to save the world? It's really hard, isn't it? So you have to just do what you can and just know that whatever you do is good enough.
Yeah.
Don't beat yourself up that you're not saving the world. Collectively, your little bit that you do, it turns into a much bigger thing, doesn't it? So, but Lizzie Carr is just doing some fascinating work, and she's often popping to Parliament and Number 10 to give her findings, and hopefully they will jolly well listen to her because she's doing it to benefit all of us as well. Yeah, those water companies, very naughty. So the next question, accessibility in SUP. We always call it, it's an accessible sport. Well, it is to us people who are, got 4 limbs and can stand up and sit down. What about all the other people that we would really love to be engaging on the water, on a stand-up paddleboard? I know you've met people who are really making inroads into making life easier, getting things laid down on the beach, to actually be able to get to the water if you're in a wheelchair. Who have you met particularly? I've been lucky enough to paddle with one of these people. I know you're going to talk about Will. Who have you met, and what great changes are they bringing to SUP boards particularly?
Yeah, I mean, the whole category, I think, of people not necessarily who are paddling the Atlantic, but who have already overcome quite a lot of restrictions in order to actually get out there and do the sport themselves. So before they go off and do anything major, they've already done something major just by getting down to the water. So Will Behenna is one of those. I paddled with him locally here. So he was paralysed as a teenager he was training for a triathlon from just below the shoulders downwards. And he's been quite an amazing individual. Despite those disabilities which he lives with, he's not only properly utilised all opportunities and problem solved in order to make sure that he can go on the water, but he's also designed a bunch of products which help other people with varying disabilities to be able to do the same, because it shouldn't just be restricted to able-bodied people to go out there and enjoy the benefits out there. And one of the more recent initiatives he's been involved in is raising the profile of beach accessibility, because we're sitting here, we're looking out over a lovely sandy beach. A conventional wheelchair is not going to be able to make it
it's not
further
going to cut
than
the
about.
mustard on that, is it? For sure,
It's not. And there are countries that do very well on this, providing launch pads and so on that allow different types of wheelchairs or devices to be able to get down to the sea. And it's not very well represented in this country. So Will's on a campaign there, and huge credit to him for doing that. I mentioned Dean Dunbar, who's absolutely, words fail me, frankly.
Blind and dangerous.
Blind and dangerous. He's sort of competed in the 11 cities. He paddleboarded across to Barrow, which is a remote island off Scotland. He's paddled from the Scillies to Cornwall, which the Celtic Crossing, which is not a small achievement, particularly with all the wild waters around there. And of course, all the other things like being shot out of a cannon and various other things that he's done.
But latterly, paddling at the ISA SUP World Championships in Denmark.
Well, there you go. So Dean qualified as the national representative from Scotland, not under any category of accessibility. It was a full entry prone paddleboarding, and he had a few challenges, I know, because they changed the course on the last day or the day before he was due to go, which wasn't ideal because he had sort of memorized it. But what an incredible athlete he is. And just while we're talking about people who have overcome adversity to get out there on the water, Tanvi Jagadish, Indian surfer girl, she fully able-bodied, but she was up against all the social pressures for not going and spending a career and a working life on the water. And that's a particularly difficult challenge to go through for a girl in India if their family is against her following that path. And she ended up being the first female, I think it might be the first person to compete for India at the World Championships, and she continues to enjoy her life on the water, teaching others and just basically enjoying competition. So that was a really lovely conversation to have as well.
Yeah, that was a good one, a really good one. Is there anything, Simon, that you don't believe you have covered on your SUPfm podcast? Any avenue of exploration into something different? Do you feel that you've covered all those bases, or is there something that you yearn to get hold of to have a chat about on your podcast?
Well, there's a couple of formats that I would like to get after. I think probably I still, despite that interview in our first season, I still don't think I've covered SUP yoga in enough detail.
Okay.
So if anyone does want to school me on that one, I'll be a willing participant in understanding more about SUP yoga. One thing that I would like to explore is more on the water interviews with people. So that would be good, because I find I have some brilliant conversations with people while we're paddling, and I think that is a real opportunity in terms of improving the format and going forward. But I have scratched most of the itches that I have. There are still some racers who I haven't spoken to and are on my list. Connor Baxter is one huge gap that I've got in my list of interviewees, but I think I'm pretty happy with where I've gone. But there's always going to be someone who pops up with some incredible experience. So there was a chap who attempted to do the Atlantic this last year, 2025, and unfortunately his boat or his board got hit by something during a huge storm, and he ended up having to turn back to the Canaries. and he was about over 1,000 kilometres out there. So he was quite a distance to have to turn back. So I'd quite like to have a chat with him.
This is something that I would never want to happen, but what happens when you hang up your microphone? You know, where does Mr. Simon SUPfm Podcast go from there? Or do you just see this just continuing? You still love it? You still got people out there you want to chat to? But just say tomorrow you went, I'm done. What would you feel that your legacy is? That what have you left this world with, SUP related?
Wow, that's a very deep question.
It is, but we're going deep, Simon. Come on.
We are. I don't have any misapprehensions about what I've produced. I haven't split the atom or anything like that. I hope it gives a bit of a wider explanation. It provides a bit more of a wider ecosystem as to what you can do with a stand-up paddleboard. And it's really interesting if I have a conversation with someone who about the podcast and they say, well, what are you talking about? Is it just places that people can paddle? Or are you just talking about, like, you know, carbon fiber versus so and so? No, the sport is so much more interesting than a kit comparison or sort of locations for paddling. I mean, both of those are useful and they've got their place, but it's the human stories and that breadth of use. So that's what I want people to get out of this, to be inspired by some of these people who have done incredible things.
Well, I really think they will, because they've inspired me for sure. And when I listen to them, I just generally want to meet them all and, you know, go further into that conversation, because you've only got a certain amount of time, haven't you, to interview. I generally listen when I'm in the gym, so it just keeps me going on that treadmill or whatever I'm doing. What are you looking forward to in the next 12 months, Simon?
Well, I think we've got some stuff that we're doing in the next 12 months, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So we're starting with SUP 12. So listeners to the podcast will be fully aware of what SUP 12 is, but just in case this is your first episode, just to fill you in on this. So it's a 12-hour race from a beach in Torquay. We don't know yet which beach as we record this, but it is a proper endurance fest, or not, depending on how you want to pursue things. So you can paddle the full 12 hours or you can just paddle for one lap. But we've been doing the interviews and the coverage of that for the last 3 years. This will be our 4th year, I think, is it this year?
So.
Yeah, and it takes quite a lot of talking to cover that full sort of 12, 13 hours that we do it. But that would be fantastic. And that's in April.
It's not just SUP 12, it's SUP 6 as well. So, and there's a 10K there this year, so there's plenty for everybody. And I'm delighted to tell you, and I don't know if you've spotted it, but Suzanne Patterson is coming back, having been a very social paddler locally here, actually, goes out on sunset paddles and tries to paddle every day. Really lovely. She was encouraged to take part last year, never ever raced in her life, and she takes on an ocean 12-hour paddle. Amazing. Loved it. That's what really makes my heart sing.
Yeah, and I interviewed her and some other newbie paddlers following that race to talk about their experience. Just putting in a plug there, if you are a potential new racer or you just want to find out what it's all about, then look back on that series.
That's a great episode, that one particularly, isn't it, with Lizzie, Magic Beans and Suzanne and myself and you talking about it, but really from a proper not a newbie paddler. They can both paddle. They both paddle a lot on the sea. But racing, both like, whoa, no, that's not what we do. And they both came along and embraced it. And at the end of the day, loved it. So yeah, it's a great episode to see those girls talking about it.
And of course, we've got the World Cup.
We have got the ICF SUP World Cup
in June, and that is also in Torquay. So that's a combination, the ICF World Cup and the Super Festival.
Yeah,
and it's over 5 days, 3 days of real hardcore racing in there as well.
Yeah.
And of course, the gladiatorial sport that is SUP polo. So if you haven't experienced SUP polo, come on down and
hilarious.
and get involved either in the racing or in the spectating, which is brilliant, and entertained all of the good people of Torquay for a goodly amount of their day. So yeah, that's really exciting. We're doing the streaming and commentary around that.
Yes, so the ICF SUP World Cup it's held once a year somewhere in the world, and it's being held in Torquay this year, which is just so exciting. And as Simon said, we've got the what we call the pro racing, the ICF racing. Everybody have a go. You can enter if you want to enter. And then you've got the festival side of it, which is more for anybody. So there really is something for every paddler's ability. It's a great place to come. It's the end of June. It's going to be hopefully hot and sunny and beautiful weather. So please just have a look at the website and in the show notes below. And we'd love to see you there, because there really will be something for everybody and worth coming for the SUP Polo alone. That is sold out already. That is full. We've got all the teams. We've got Brian and Blue Chip who will be there running the show as they've been involved in SUP Polo for, 11 years or something. Amazing. So we'd love to see you all there.
Absolutely. And just finally to say, and you would have noticed if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, we've stepped away from this. All the early episodes had a stadium announcer from an American sport saying, "Aloha, welcome to the SUPfm Podcast." So that was my addition. I hold my hands up to that one. But the point I was trying to make is the aloha factor around the sport. So obviously it's got a lot to owe to Polynesian roots, and I think as a sport we have a choice to make in terms of the inclusivity. And what I mean is, not necessarily people who are able-bodied or don't have the opportunity, but just beginners, just people coming in and racing for the first time, and making them feel part of the tribe. Because ultimately there is one leveler here, which is the water, which it doesn't matter what level of skill you are, is still a challenge, or can be a challenge regardless. So we're all united enjoying the water, and I think that aloha factor sorry, I'm not getting emotional, it's my throat. And I think that aloha factor is really important to maintain within the sport, and everyone has a responsibility, from governance to race directors all the way through, to make people feel welcomed and to make sure that they enjoy the sport when they take part. There's no room for kit snobbery or anything like that. So that's something that is no longer part of the show. It's something that I still want to feel that it sort of runs through all of the episodes.
Maybe you need to just play that at the end of this episode, just for old time's sakes. Yes, and we all started at the bottom. We all start at a level playing field. So please do have a go, suck at something new, in the words of somebody. Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on this side of the couch instead of you talking to me and asking me questions. I love being involved in your podcast for sure. We always work well together. Can't wait to work with you at SUP 12 and the ICF. But again, many, many congratulations on staying with it and really being, when I listen to you, I listen to lots of different podcasts. You are very professional. You clearly do your research. You're clearly really invested in the person that you are interviewing. You've really researched them and you really want, it comes across that you really want to interview that person, not just to tick off the box. It's something that you're interested in, you're fascinated in, and that comes across. You question well. I'm in awe of your super skills, my friend. So I just want to say congratulations again on doing 10 years and sticking with it. Please keep doing it forever and ever, because if you've got no other listeners, I'm your girl. I'll listen.
Thank you. And if all else fails, I'll see you on the water.
Absolutely. See you on the water, Simon. Thank you.